Today is a special day. The motorcycle I'm riding is the most exciting one I've ridden at Autocar. And the time I've spent with it has gone by in a blur, quite like the bike itself. This is it, the 790 Duke. Now we've already ridden the 790 on a racetrack, but near perfect conditions reveal little as to what it's like out in the real world. So that's what we're here to find out. Starting things off with the engine. We first experienced it on the track, and now we had the opportunity to put some numbers to the performance on offer. This 790 Duke demolished a 0 to 60 sprint in under 2 seconds, with 100 km per hour coming in just 1.5 seconds later. Given how eager and responsive this engine can be, you'd expect it to be a bit cumbersome to live with on the streets. But boy did the 790 prove us wrong. KTM's new parallel twin is pleasantly smooth, and the dual counterbalancers keep it that way even higher up in the rev range. The 790 offers 4 riding modes, and we'll get to those later on in this video, but in the right setting, this Duke is a very easy big bike. Tractable gearing lets you potter around at as low as 40 km per hour in 4th gear, but when the space in front of you clears up, twist the throttle and the bike will surge forward in anger because there's always torque that's accessible, far more than a high revving inline 3 or 4 cylinder engine. In heavy traffic, you'll also be grateful for the light clutch. That said, not all is perfect and there's no escaping the fact that bigger engines do produce heat. This one is no different and it definitely does get hot. But having said that, the heat coming off the engine wasn't something that bothered me. If I had to compare it to another bike, then I'd say the 790 is a lot like the 390 in terms of the heat it produced. Of course, it gets pretty hot in absolutely jammed traffic, but it's not unbearable, and with a little conviction, you could live with it on a day-to-day basis. As for the pillion, well, the high-rise exhaust will serve to be a problem, especially if you're not geared up, and then there's the fact that the right side of the grab rail is in line with the exit of the exhaust pipe. Overall, the bike is what you could consider comfortable. You sit upright on a wide seat, and while the suspension is understandably set towards the firmer side, it's not harshly stiff, and you can certainly get by most city roads without constantly questioning your choice of motorcycle. The superb ground clearance also takes away any tension when you meet a badly designed speed breaker. What's really impressive in the city though is how slim the bike feels and how tight the turning radius is. The degree of freedom it offers will have you feeling like you're riding and filtering through traffic on one of the smaller Dukes. Despite how docile and well-mannered I just made this bike sound, there's no forgetting that this Duke is an all-out performance machine. Now the electronics that this bike offers play a huge role in how easy it is to ride. So let's take a quick look on what it has to offer. The 790 offers 4 riding modes: rain, street, sport and track that alter throttle response and traction control. Rain mode brings a 2% drop in power and very gentle throttle that almost makes the 790 feel like a well-behaved domesticated animal that waits on your command. Street is quite manageable too, but switch to sport and it will pull at the leash in an almost alarming fashion. Track mode turns it into an all-out hellraiser and the engine became far too responsive for my liking out on a public road. The change in character between the modes is really impressive, and something else that I enjoyed just as much was the quick shifter. Upshifts are seamlessly smooth even at 2 or 3000 rpm, and it works just as well with downshifts, which makes using the system at city speeds smooth and enjoyable. Now unfortunately, the 790 hasn't been around long enough for us to tell you what it's like to maintain. But we've been told that a general service will set you back around 8 to 9,000 rupees. That's usually how much these bigger bikes demand. And considering that the recommended service intervals are every 15,000 kilometers, it's a relatively reasonable price to pay. Unfortunately, despite as much as we'd have liked to, We also didn't have the bike long enough to carry out our standard fuel efficiency test. But in the time we did have it, it returned about 17.5 km to the liter. This was a figure that came about after riding the 790 in heavy traffic and over some very spirited riding on every stretch of open road I encountered. That's not a bad figure at all, considering how rapidly this bike can plaster a smile across your face.
I've come to realize that the 790 Duke is as sporty as a commuter can get. Now, calling it a commuter is a bit of a crime, but this really is a motorcycle that you can live with and commute on a daily basis. The 790 has more performance on offer than you'll ever need on the streets, and it will be more at home on a racetrack. But considering how hard it is to get frequent track time in India, you might as well invest in a motorcycle that's just as good off one. This 790 Duke walks the fine line between the two remarkably well.